Hey everybody, I want to welcome you guys back to my author's channel here on YouTube. Today is the third installment of Building a Better Monster, where I'll be finishing up the seating out here at the clearing and talking about the creatures that I have created for Rivendoah. So I hope you guys will join me a little bit today and we can talk about monsters and the evil creatures in Rivendoah. Hey everyone, welcome to day 3 of Building a Better Monster, my video series on how I've approached the creatures in my trilogy of novels, Rivendoah. Before we get started talking about the mythology of the monsters in my novels, I wanted to kind of get back to building the final seat out here at the clearing. I wanted to show you guys a change I made since the last video. I did go ahead and move the second seat that I created out here, the log with the wood on top. I did move it over. I had talked about maybe moving the fire pit, but instead I decided to go ahead and move one of the two seats that I set. All right, I got some comfortable seating, still have some more to work on. Now I've got 2 of the seats done, so I'll be ready to have a group of people out here soon. One of the things I am going to have to consider though, and I don't know if you can see it here, but this seat is very close to the fire pit, and the other seat over here is very far away. I don't know what I was thinking when I built the fire pit, but it is definitely not in the center of the space I have out here. So I may end up having to move the entire fire pit over probably about a foot, but we'll see how that goes. That'll be a project for another video. I went ahead and moved it over to the left, or over to the right, depending on where you're looking. And you can see that it sort of creates more of a circular space out here at the fire pit. The idea of moving the fire pit was just that would have been so much work, and this was a much easier solution that I think works much better. But anyway, so now you can see where the 2 seats are, and I've taken another piece of wood and placed it over there so that, you know, forms more of a communal setting around the fire pit. Now for today, I'm going to be working on the final seat here, which is primarily where I usually sit, which is right here. I'm going to be building 2 small little tabletops with some circular rounds of wood from these logs that I cut, and placing the final piece of wood for the seat here. I wanted to go ahead and show you what I had done previously. I went ahead and placed the 2 pine logs on either side, dug them in, and you can see that I've got them in very secure. And now I'm going to place the plank on top, the gray wooden planks that I got from the pallets for my stacked stone. This is the longest one. It's going to go on top, so I'm going to lay it on and go ahead and nail that in. I made this one a little longer so it'll give me space to place any camping gear or cooking gear that I have that I'm going to be using out here at the campsite, and Also, I dug, as I mentioned before, I dug the two flat rounds, and I'm going to place them in on either side as little side tables. As usual, I'm going to go ahead and assemble the rest of the pieces and parts of the video I captured of making the seat out here and put it to music. Hope you enjoy it. After which we'll talk about the evil monsters and mythology in Rivendoah. One of the things I wanted to show you guys was, as I was digging out the clearing here, it was on a hill or slight incline, and I wanted to level it out. So I placed some logs and then I put in dirt to level it out and make a nice flat space. But in the process of doing that, I dug up some of the beautiful green moss and replanted it around some of the logs that I put in place. And I'm going to keep that, and I'm going to put some around the little circular rounds that I'm using as the end tables on each side of the bench. It has a nice look to it, and it's amazing how strong that moss is. You can move it around, replant it, put a little water on it, and it'll grow fine no matter where you put it. All right, well, I have my clearing set up now out here. I hope you guys enjoyed watching me assemble that out here over the course of the last 3 videos. And as promised, today I'm going to be talking about, in this final installment of Building a Better Monster, I'm going to give you a breakdown of the creatures and monsters that I'm creating for Rivendoah. But first, I wanted to talk a little bit about the books that have influenced me as a writer. I have shared a lot about the movies and some of the other things that I have seen, in my childhood and growing up that influenced my desire to be a writer and influenced my, love of horror and dark fantasy. But I really haven't talked a lot about the writers and the written works that have influenced me. I can't really talk about the monsters in Rivendoah without first mentioning J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, as well as many other written works, of which I've read most. But I did want to mention that, I think I first read The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. I think I read The Hobbit first as a young child in school. And I seem to remember our teacher, sharing it with us. And then a little bit later, I read the Lord of the Rings. And it really had a great impact on me as a young reader. Tolkien's ability to make his world seem real and his characters really believable, and for you to really care about his characters, is something that I want to use as a model for Rivendoah. Tolkien's writing has become sort of the blueprint for high fantasy in written novels and on film. But oddly enough, I don't think Tolkien would have thought of his work as fantasy or high fantasy. I think he considered it more of a mythology. A history of Britain is sort of, I think, was his approach, and I think that's what gives it its real sense of reality. Is it almost feels like a prehistory rather than a fantasy tale. Now, of course, Rivendoah is going to be something altogether different. It takes place in modern times primarily, though there is some flashback to historical times. For the most part, it takes place in the present or near present, and but what I want to take away from the writings of Tolkien was the realism that he brought to the plot, and the way he made you really care for the characters. That's kind of my goal for Rivendoah. Another major influence for me as a writer are the works and the writings of Stephen King, who of course is the master of the horror genre, though I think his works go well beyond that specific genre of writing. He really kind of has moved into so many different territories. He writes fantasy, science fiction, but his base is really in horror. That's where I think he is his strongest. I was influenced as a younger man by the writings that he did, the books, the novels, The Stand, It, The Shining, to name a few. And more recently, Under the Dome, I thought was a really excellent piece of fiction. And his short stories are also incredible. He has different collections of short stories he's put out over the years, but some of the standouts for me were The Mist, The Mangler, I love that story, The Raft, and there are many others, but those are just a few of my favorites. However, it was his novel Salem's Lot that really influenced how I was going to approach my trilogy of novels, Rivendoah. That particular book really hooked me on horror. I remember reading it, I think when I was 14, maybe 15, and I loved his modern retelling of the classic vampire story. It just is, he takes all the elements of, Dracula and other vampire stories, and he puts them into his a modern retelling, which it was, at the time in 1974 it was modern, and still is, but it just had a very strong influence on me. And Salem's Lot was one of the few books that I remember frightening me so much that I actually had to put the book down in mid-read. I remember, I think I was definitely 14 at the time, and my room at that age, I had two single beds, and one of them was the bed that I slept in was up against the window, and it had curtains. but the curtains would never really shut. So at night, you could, that window was right there where I was laying. And I'd always be, thinking, God, somebody could see in the window if they were outside looking in. And I think I was reading the scene where Matt Burke, the teacher in the story, is in his house, and he's brought home Mike Ryerson, who he met at Dell's at the bar. And he brought him home because he looked really sick. He thought he was either heavy drug use or something, but he looked terrible. So and Mike was telling him how frightened he was. So he brought him home to stay and puts him in the guest room, and then he goes to bed. And, being a teacher and a reader, one of the first things he thought of was the story of by Bram Stoker of Dracula. And he noticed that he had two puncture wounds on his neck. And so then he's sitting in bed, and he suddenly realizes that he is terrified. And then he hears the window open, and he hears, I think it's described as, he hears the evil laugh of a child, and then the sucking sounds. Ooh, it just sent chills down my spine when I remember reading it. Still does even today. And that's a book I can pick up, and like The Lord of the Rings, I can pick up Salem's Lot and read it from beginning to end and enjoy it as much as I did the first time I read it. But I remember that sitting by that window in bed and thinking, I'm going to look out that window and I'm going to see a white face out there grinning, with sharp fangs. And didn't happen, but of course. But that I remember that moment reading that. And I really want to have, hopefully, moments in Rivendoah, if not in the first, the second, or third, that have that level, that can inspire that level of fear and terror in someone reading it. I'm not as interested in the gross out as much as I am in the idea of really making terrifying people who are reading the book. One of the things I also admire in Salem's Lot and in King's approach to the story is his ruthlessness with his characters. He populates an entire town, and he basically kills off everybody, including all the main characters except for two. And there are a couple characters that die, or become vampires in the story, and you really feel horrible. I mean, I don't know if you've read the story, but maybe I shouldn't give it away. I won't, because it's also about to be made into a big screen motion picture, which should be coming out soon. I think it's actually being filmed right now, or it starts. I just read recently that it's starting to film in Ipswich, Massachusetts, which is where the Salem witch trials took place, and where the Witches of Eastwick was filmed, and I think The Crucible, the movie The Crucible. It's a small sort of Maine-like town, North American town, that is just perfect for recreating the town of Jerusalem's Lot, Salem's Lot in the book. But anyway, I just love the fact that he had no, he just, I think many writers, characters become beloved, not only to the readers, to the writers, and his ruthlessness of just going in there and, cutting them up and, doing what he had to do, and made it a very powerful book. And I think to me, it's one of my favorite of all of his writings is Salem's Lot. And it's going to be sort of a blueprint for, I'm not going to copy what he writes, but I'm going to, it's in terms of his approach, I really want to capture a lot of the elements that I love about that book, and I want to have, create my version. My monsters are not going to be vampires, they're not going to be werewolves, they're not going to be any of the traditional monsters, but I want to capture some of the essence of the power of that kind of writing. If I could do that even a little bit, capture some of that, the power of his writing, I will feel that Rivendoah is a success. Another book that really strongly influenced me as a child was H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds. It is just a perfect story of sort of the end of the world and alien invasion. It again, like The Lord of the Rings, it became sort of the blueprint for all sci-fi pictures about alien invasion. What I like most about the story of War of the Worlds is the slow evolution of the plot. The protagonist, or as he is called, the narrator, is never named in the book. You don't know who he is. I don't think his name is ever mentioned, but it's a first-person perspective in the writing, and everything that happens, he sort of narrates. It's from his point of view. He sees the whole Martian invasion unfold, and of course he's like right in the middle of it from the moment it begins. He happens to be at the observatory when they see the first cylinders take off from Mars. He's right there in Woking at Horsell Commons in England, where the first cylinder lands and opens up. He's there when it opens, and he sees the entire invasion unfold from the sand pits on Horsell Commons all the way to the seat of civilization at the time in London, England. What I find really interesting too is that it takes place in in a real place, which is how I'm approaching Rivendoah. You can walk from Horsell Commons, and those sand pits are still there, all the way traveling from Woking to Weybridge to Maybury, right up to London. You can follow the sort of the trail of the Martian attack on our civilization at the time, and that's one of the aspects that I like to write. I like to write about places that actually exist. So all the places that I'm going to be writing about, that I have written about and will be writing about in the trilogy Rivendoah, are actual places that I've been, that I can go and stand. And for me, that's a real necessary part of writing, is that I can write a real sense of reality and give a sense of reality to the environment, because I've actually been there. I've seen it with my own eyes, and that's real important to me as a writer. Not everybody needs to do that. I'm sure if you're writing a sci-fi novel in space, you're going to have to just make it up. But for me, I like to write about places where I've actually been, things I've actually seen, and then I can take little nuggets of all these wonderful things that I have found over the years, for instance in the city of Richmond, and I can put them into this novel, and I find that very exciting and a lot of fun. Okay, so I think I'm ready to start talking about the monsters and dark creatures in Rivendoah. Before I begin, I'm going to go ahead and fill up a little bit more of my kuksa here. I have drank all the coffee in it, and as in the previous couple of videos, I'm not making a fire out here because we're in August, in the dog days of summer, and even though it is a little bit cooler today, it's a little too hot for a fire. So let me go ahead and fill up, and we'll get started, and I'll share with you the dark creatures and monsters of Rivendoah. Oops. The antagonist in Rivendoah is named Malcolm Cambridge Sutton. He has lived a long time, and his origins, as revealed in the first book at least, are unknown to the protagonists and the heroes in the story. His ancient name is Angren Vulkgur, which originates from a language that is unknown to the modern world. So as you can imagine, he has lived for a very long time. He has figured out how to extend life, but there is a price to be paid for that, which you'll see when you read the book. He is believed to have emigrated to the U.S. From Germany sometime in the early 1800s. He is named the Nachtführer, or leader of the night, by Parker Davis. Parker Davis is introduced in the prologue, and he himself is sort of a mysterious character that is revealed a little bit at a time over the course of the 3 novels. But he actually lived in the past, in the 1925, which is when the story begins, and then it jumps to the present. And it is through his writings and the things he's left behind that will help Gray Hunter and the people around him, who he gathers to help fight this evil that presents itself. The Parker Davis is the person who is kind of the source of most of the information about this evil entity. It is through his illustrations and the writings in the journals that he has kept, that the heroes find out who Malcolm Sutton is and has become. But every good villain needs a circle of dark followers. His grim servants are called dreads, and of course this is a name that Parker Davis gives them. Davis names them the Nachtslave, or night slaves. Parker Davis's origin, his parents or grandparents, I believe, as I've written it, are emigrated from Germany also, or Austria perhaps, and the German language is very much in his mind. It's something he knows, and he tends to use the German dialect and language to describe these dark creatures. In the book, the dreads are introduced first. These Nacht slaves, and they number 5. And their leader is the Slavenführer, or the overseer, and he sort of controls the 5 dreads, who then, of course, are under the will of Malcolm Sutton, who is their master. The dreads are able to raise an army of creatures under the power of Sutton. These creatures are called the Kraven, and they walk the night under the will of their master. The Kraven are nocturnal creatures who can either be living or dead. Not 100% sure of this yet. I may tweak this a little bit before the first book comes out. But right now they are in 2 sort of forms. There are the Kraven Atmung, who are living, breathing men who are under the will of the evil Sutton. Then there are the terrifying Kraven-Untote, who are nocturnal creatures who can only come out at night, and they disappear in the morning. But these are horrifying creatures. They are animated undead who come in the shapes of fire and ash and burn their victims alive. Horrible, horrible death, which of course I'm going to show in the book. But anyway, and then finally there's something I'm calling the Maschine Kreatur, and these are creatures that were once machines. I don't want to get into too much detail, but for instance, a car that have been transformed or transmuted into living, breathing monsters. And like the Kraven-Untote, they only exist in the nocturnal hours, and then at daylight they return back to machines. But they aren't really 100% what they were before in terms of being a machine. So I don't want to give away too much. But I hope this gives you guys sort of whets your appetite for the creatures and monsters that I'm going to have in my trilogy of novels, Rivendoah. I don't want to give too much away because, really the whole point of talking about this is to get my readers interested in the books, and hopefully they'll want to read it. So anyway, with that, I'll kind of go ahead and wrap up this video, which is the third in a series of 3. In a later video, I do want to explain the sort of the mythology of the magic in Rivendoah and how it works. I want to explain how magic, metallurgy, and the sorcery of symbols are combined to extend life and give power to the villains and monsters in Rivendoah. Well, that ought to wrap things up for the final video in Building a Better Monster series. I hope you have enjoyed watching, and I hope it's given you an appetite for the trilogy of novels, which hopefully will soon debut, at least the first novel of Rivendoah, which hopefully by the end of the year I'm shooting for having that complete. So keep your fingers crossed that I get it all wrapped up and ready for reading by that time. I still have some writing left to do on it. Of course, major first, second, and third draft work. It has to be done, but if I can make it by the end of the year, that will be my goal. So anyway, thanks for coming along today, and I will see you guys in the next video.